Can you guys hear me okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're just a minute or two late. I said that I would promise that I'll finish on time. I'm Terence McDevitt with Bluefish Development Group out of Austin. Today we're going to talk about integrations with DocuSign's REST API. It's pretty cool. They've got an API, very powerful API for getting electronic signatures on documents. And we've implemented a customization in Alfresco to integrate with that REST API and get documents signed. Did anyone go to Nate McMinn's presentation yesterday on the PDF toolkit and countersign? You did, okay. This is not going to be the same, so it's not a repeat of what you saw yesterday. So what are we going to do today? We're going to give brief introductions about who I am, who Bluefish Development Group is. We'll talk about what our objectives and goals are for the day. We'll talk about an e-sig. I'll show the integration. I'll actually give a demo of it. And then we'll talk about the technical details if that makes sense. Sort of depends on the amount of time we have and the audience that we have. And then I'll open it up for Q&A. I'm going to try to leave 10 minutes for Q&A. The sessions that I've been in this week, we just tend to finish right at the end, and there's just not enough time for questions. So I'm going to go out of my way to make sure we can get 10 minutes in for questions. So I'm Terence. That's me. I'm not so vain that I feel like I have to have my picture up there too, but I did that for people who are going to be looking at this presentation offline who may not have been at this presentation. So we're out of Austin, a great town to be in. I'm a solution architect at Bluefish Development Group. I've been working with ECM solutions for almost 10 years. Before Alfresco, a lot of Documentum work. And then during that time, of course, I've seen a whole variety of ECM projects. Real quick, who's Bluefish? If you haven't heard about us, based in Austin, we've been doing ECM consulting for about 14 years. And again, similar to the experiences I've had, we've had a wide variety of clients and projects that we've worked on over the years. Our focus now is really energy and oil solutions, mainly because of our geographic location. We have a lot of clients who are in that industry and looking for content management solutions. We've also got some business solutions that we're rolling out for our clients that include both Alfresco Workdesk and Alfresco Share from a variety of sort of use cases that you guys are probably familiar with. Of course, collaboration is a big thing for us. Share, we do a lot of Share customizations. We do some DocuSign work, which you're going to see today. Web experience management, we are a partner of Crafter Software, so I don't know if you guys have had a chance to go up to the Crafter booth. Pretty cool stuff. So we're a partner of theirs. Capture and index, we've got a lot of clients right now that are working with capture solutions like Effisoft. And then content migration. So we've, over the years, and you guys probably all know this, but we've seen a lot of clients who come to us and say, we've got 10 million documents that need to be brought over from SharePoint or Documentum or whatever it might be. Help us migrate those. And we've had enough of those to the point where we decided to create a practice dedicated to content migrations and actually have a product called Migration Workbench that facilitates that process. Okay, so let's talk about today. So what are we trying to do? I want to show the DocuSign integration that we created and provide some technical details on it. I have given a presentation like this in the past. It's actually a webinar that's available on our website, but more from a business standpoint of why would I want to integrate with DocuSign? Why would I want to buy it? Why would I want to roll it out to my business? And we show a demo of it. But what we didn't do in that webinar is get into the technical details of how this is working. So I want to do that today. And really, I'm hoping that coming out of this, you guys can say, hey, we know it's possible. We know that these types of integrations are possible. We can integrate them with workflows and just sort of show you how it works. But really, before I get into that, I want to get a sense of who the audience is. Originally, when I planned out this presentation, I wanted to go into code and actually debug and show things like that. But if you guys aren't technical, then I don't want to do that. I don't want to bore you. So let me get a raise of hands. How many of you would you consider yourselves representatives of the business side of what you do? Okay, that's good. And now, how many developers do we have in the room? Oh, good. All right. And technical architects? Probably some of you are the developers that raise their hands too. Okay. All right, that's good. And how many people want to see code? Okay, all right. If we run out of time for whatever reason, just get me offline afterwards and I can show you, we can go into a corner and I'll show you what we did. But so this is, the goals for today, as follows. And again, I want to try to get this thing done and leave you guys time for questions and answers. Okay? All right, so before we go into this, I'm going to ask another show of hands. How many people are familiar with what e-signatures are? Okay, all right. How many people are actually using some sort of e-signature component in their business? Okay, not a lot of you. So that's not surprising, actually. You know, we see this often with potential clients. So just real quick, I want to ask maybe 2 or 3 people a one-word reason why you're not using something like DocuSign. So who wants to answer that with one word? You, sir. Yeah, one word. Is it cost, users, tools, complexity? Okay. How about someone else?
It's information from the customer. They don't actually understand what it is.
From your users or the people that you work with?
Users.
Users, okay. All right, great. All right, so I'll touch on both of those. A lot of times people talk about cost. You know, what's the cost involved? And I'll talk about that as well today, and I'll touch on it just a little bit. But let's talk about an e-sig. So what's an e-sig? When we sat down to do this integration a year ago, you know, we kind of asked ourselves, well, we think we know what e-sigs are, but then started to do a little research and realized, well, it's you know, not exactly what you think it is. E-signatures are a visual representation of a signature. It could be a brand, a mark, an actual signature. But they're not digital signatures, so don't get them confused with digital signatures. You can think of a digital signature as proof that a document is the document that you say it is. It's like going to get something notarized. You sign a title to a car when you sell it, but that signature alone isn't enough. You need to go get it notarized, and that notary says this is that document. So that's what a digital signature is. But e-signatures are different. E-signatures are actually that visual representation. If you've ever gotten a package from FedEx or UPS, right, you always have to sign that silly little thing, and it never actually, you know, works the way you want it to, and your signature looks terrible. But that doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what your signature looks like. It's sort of a binding, hey, I've actually received this package, and that's all really that matters, is that you can indicate that. Someone asked me the other day about whether or not these sorts of solutions like DocuSign and electronic signatures in general are binding, and they are in the United States. So in the US, if you have a document that's signed electronically within the US, it's legally binding. And in many countries, that's the case. It's not the case around the world. So if you're from outside of the United States, you may want to find out before you go off into building a solution like this. So any questions about e-sigs? Okay. In my other presentation that I did a few months back, it's a webinar, it's on our site, I do talk a little bit more about why DocuSign, why it would be important to use such a service as opposed to building your own or not using the service at all. So if you're interested in that, definitely go to our site and check it out. So what are we going to do today? So we've got a demo, and I really wanted to show, you know, from start to finish how I get a document. I run it through a workflow. I send it out to a third party that's not even part of our, you know, our fake company that I've got. And that person gets a notification. They look at the contract. They sign it. They finish and submit it back into the repository. And so I'll show that whole flow today. And I'm going to fly through it in the demo, and then we'll come back to it and do it again and look at it from a more technical standpoint. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to switch over. I'm going to be doing a little switching here, so hopefully it's not too jarring. I'm actually going to show something today that many of you may not have seen before. So has anyone gone to any of the work desk sessions this week? Okay, all right. So I decided that we've been doing some work desk work lately. It's maybe not getting as much visibility as we'd like it to. So I decided, hey, let's do this demonstration through Workdesk. For you Share zealots out there, I can also show you this in Share if you want. If we've got time, I will. So I'm going to go ahead and log into Workdesk. And I've done a bunch of Workdesk webinars over the last few months. Those are also on our site. So if you're interested in what Workdesk is, look at the webinars or talk to me afterwards. I'm not going to go into details about what it is. It's pretty cool. So it provides, I'll give a brief sentence about it, provides role-based functionality and views into the repository. So Share, you log in and you get all these bells and whistles and it's kind of cool, but sometimes for users it's a little bit overwhelming. And for the use case that we're going to show, where we've got contracts and we want to get contracts signed, you can imagine a use case where a legal department and maybe a marketing department are managing these contracts. They don't want to deal with share. They don't want to deal with all of the buttons and noise and share. So something like Workdesk is pretty cool for them because it gives them the functionality that they need and the view that they need on the content. So you may not be able to see the actual text very well because of the resolution of the monitor. So I'm going to just, or the display. So I'm going to just go ahead and zoom in when I can. So I've got this company, Impact Sports Marketing. It's just a fictitious company that we made up for our webinars. They're responsible for lining up events and players and sponsors and so forth for a variety of sports events. And we've got an equipment contract that we want for the upcoming NBA finals. And the equipment contract is about procuring foam fingers, those big giant foam fingers that they give out at events like this. So we've got this campaign. And within the campaign, we've got a variety of views into our content. So we've got proposals, we've got a request for proposal, correspondence. And as a marketing person, I want to try to get one of my contracts signed with one of my external vendors. So I've done all my work to create that contract. With Workdesk, I can actually create contract templates and just pull from that and then just fill in the details that are relevant to that contract. So I've done all that work. I've got this document in the repository that I want to send off for signatures. Now, in Workdesk, you can actually launch workflows just like you can in Share. It's all on top of Alfresco repository, just like Share is. It leverages activity workflows just like Share. So I can launch those here, and you can see the standard, kind of out of the box, pool to review and approval workflows that you'd see in Share. The ad hoc workflow, but we've also got some of our own custom workflows, request e-signature, request it via Workdesk. So those are accessible through Workdesk. If you wanted to actually kick it off there, you could. I'm not going to do that because I don't want users in this case to have to think about the fact that they have to start a workflow. What I'd rather do is base it off of metadata. So I've got this foam finger deal document. It's been uploaded into Workdesk, and I'm going to go ahead and just change the status of this to pending. So when I mark it as pending, automatically through a folder rule behind the scenes, we're actually going in and sending that through a workflow. And that workflow is integrating with, it's calling into what's called our DocuSign SDK. So we have built a DocuSign SDK that is calling into the DocuSign service via REST, sending that content in, sending it to the appropriate person, which I've configured. You didn't see that, but it's configured. And then it's out for review and signature from that user. So you can see here that I've got, let me zoom in just a little bit more. I've got a document here now in that folder. We've renamed it so that it says it's waiting for signature. I've got some status here, so it's pending signature. And here's the person that it went to, and here's the date that it went out. So that's valuable for people in your departments that have to deal with signatures and tracking down. I emailed a document with a signature to Joe Smith out in some company, and I don't know the status of it. I don't know when I sent it. I have to go through my email. If one of my coworkers wants to know, then they have to call me, and I have to dig through my email to figure out the answer to when did that get sent. In this case, we're sort of tracking all of that through properties on the document. It's all through an aspect and properties on that aspect. So now I know that that document's been sent. Well, great. So now I need to get the thing signed, right? That notification has been sent out through DocuSign. That's one of the cool pieces of using DocuSign is that they take care of all of the details for you. So you just send your document in, you tell it where it needs to go, and then DocuSign sort of handles the rest. So I'm going to show this. Now I'm sort of Joe Smith, the guy on the receiving end of this, the one that needs to sign the contract. And I'm going to show how this is going to work for him. So I am possibly tempting the demo gods on this, so we'll see. So I've got a, oh good, okay. So I've got a phone, and I'm this guy at this company. Well, now you all know my passcode. I'm gonna have to go change all my ATM and everything, Okay, so this is my inbox, and that is 953. It's actually the email I just got. So I'm gonna go ahead and click into this, and there you go. So I'm this user. BFGdemo.creative is the email address we're using, but imagine I'm Joe Smith. And I get this email, and sure enough, it says, hey, you've got an email from Impact Sports Marketing. It's Terence, and he wants you to sign a document. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is actually working nicely. So this is DocuSign. I've opened up Safari just by clicking that link. I'm in DocuSign, and now I can say, hey, I want to do business with Impact Sports Marketing, and I want to review this document. So here's this document. This is the request for proposal for the foam fingers that I want. And I'm going to go, just kind of scroll through the document and view it and make sure it's actually what I, expect it to be. And I'm good. I want to sign this thing and get it through the process. So I'm going to go ahead and sign this. And all I have to do is tap into the document where I want the signature to be. I can drop my signature in, and I can actually, sign this thing. So, and that's what happens when I get packages at UPS. That's what it looks like. So I can do a little smiley face, and I can adopt this thing and sign it. So, okay. So that's it. So it says, are you finished signing? And I'm done. So you'll notice that, as the end user, as the person signing this document, that's it, right? I get an email, by the way, another email that says, I'll switch to it real quick, that says, hey, you've actually completed this. So I get notifications that DocuSign has received it, and then, in theory, that whoever sent it to me should also receive it. So that's pretty cool. And as a user, I didn't really need to do anything. I didn't need to install a client. It's not Flash-based. It's all HTML5. I could do it on my phone. I could also do it, just straight up through a browser. I could do it on my iPad. It's very, very cool. And I didn't need an account. I didn't need a DocuSign account to sign that, right? I just got that notification. I logged in. I looked at the document, and I signed it. So someone mentioned earlier about users and customers, right? So you're concerned about your users and making sure that they're getting a good experience. For your internal users, actually kicking off that workflow, pretty easy. You can do this, as long as you've got the code there like we've got here, and you don't make them jump through a bunch of hoops to get the signature out. It's pretty straightforward. It's part of their business process. For the people signing the documents, it's very easy. They just get an email, they open up the document, they look at it, and they sign it, and they're done. Right? There's no installation or anything like that. So if I go back to my repository here, let me zoom out. I should have yeah, I do, good. I'll explain this in a minute, what that is. So if I go back into this folder in Workdesk, I now have a signed document. And if I go down to here, there's my little smiley face on that document. And you can actually see there's some watermarking here that DocuSign puts in to say, I don't know what just happened there, sorry. That DocuSign puts in there to indicate that it got signed through them. We're using a demo account for DocuSign, so it puts a whole bunch of nasty red text up there. But in a production environment, that wouldn't actually be the case. So that was it. That's my document. It's signed. It's back in the repository. Through the workflow, we actually indicate that this is complete. Now, you probably can't see that, but let me zoom in. We indicate that that's completed. The original document was marked as sent. Now, that's the end of this workflow, but you could imagine that in your actual workflow or a production workflow, that signed document, something else happens to it. Maybe it gets, the original document gets versioned with that signed document. For the case of the demo, we just decided to put that document in addition to the original document. So it's there, it's completed, that was it. Okay, now the workflow is pretty simple. It doesn't include multiple parties, and you can imagine that you've got, especially in something like a sports marketing firm, they probably deal with many people for a particular event, so they have to get different signatures on the same document. Completely possible with DocuSign. It's also possible with our integration, but I didn't show that. So, all right. So let me go back to the presentation. Any questions before I move back into the pres? I am going to explain how this is all working if you're interested. And now my resolution is there we go. Okay. Any questions before I talk about how it's working? All right. Okay, so we've got Alfresco, and we've got an activity workflow. That was sort of what kicks off everything. I mentioned that I've got that sent button. When I mark something as pending, then that document goes through the workflow. We've got this custom DocuSign wrapper. It's really an SDK that we built. Sounds like a fancy term. It's really not. It's some code that we built that wraps the REST API in DocuSign. I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. And then we've got DocuSign. So DocuSign's out on the interwebs, and we pass a document and an envelope through the REST API. I'll talk about an envelope in a second. The signer of the document gets notified. They sign the document. DocuSign says, hey, this person signed it. Now, here's kind of where the magic happens. DocuSign knows to go back to, it's basically a callback, if you can think of it that way. DocuSign is configured to say, all right, this document came from Impact Sports Marketing, and when I send it back, I'm going to send it back to this location, all over HTTP. In a production environment and with a production account of DocuSign, it's only SSL. You can't do it over HTTP. In our demo, it's HTTP because we're using the dev account for DocuSign. And what we're calling into is what we call a proxy. And it's basically just a PHP script that's exposed over the internet. And that PHP script takes the envelope from DocuSign, and it writes it to disk, and then it curls that document into the Alfresco repository. And we've got an ingestion web script that takes that content and says, OK, I'm going to parse this envelope that was sent in by DocuSign, and I'm actually going to do something with it. In this case, it's take it, put it in the repository, create a node, stream the content to that node, assign some properties. Now, why are we doing that? Why isn't DocuSign just going directly to that web script? Well, it could if you wanted it to, but many of you probably don't want to be exposing your repository directly out through the internet. And so what we've done in this example is we've just created this proxy, real simple. It's outside of our firewall, and it's not secured, and and that's why we've done it that way. And it knows about our Alfresco repository and can connect appropriately. Okay, and I'll show code for all of this if you guys want to see it. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the specific customizations that we've done. So I've got a little, that diagram that we just saw, I've sort of got it down here in the lower right to give you context about where I'm talking about things. So the customizations, we've got the workflow. The workflow actually does a few things to prep the envelope and to prep the document and then create the envelope. So it attaches an aspect to it, and that aspect handles certain information about who is this going to, who initiated it, a few other things. And then the workflow ID. The workflow ID is important because later on we actually sync up the document coming from DocuSign based on that workflow ID. And then it calls into the DocuSign SDK that we've got. I have API there, but it's actually the SDK. And it creates what's called an envelope. And an envelope is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's a wrapper for the content. It has an address label on it, like who this is going to. It has some account information about who it's from. DocuSign uses that for billing purposes and rerouting purposes. And then it actually sends the request off to DocuSign. So it preps it all and says, OK, go do this. And then our SDK kind of steps in and says, I'm going to go make the REST calls. I'm going to do all the kind of the geeky stuff behind the scenes and call into DocuSign. There's also this web script that I talked about that's within the repository. And I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail later. But it's responsible for calling back into taking that callback from that PHP script and knowing what to do with that document and being able to ingest it. So we've got this wrapper API pseudo SDK thing. So it's Java-based. It's just a set of classes that we've got. It's a library that we've got that we use directly from our workflow. I don't know if anybody got a chance to go to Gary Cox's Java delegate workflow presentation yesterday, which is pretty awesome. Shows you how to call into Java classes through a workflow. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So we've got some Java delegates in our workflow tasks. Those delegates invoke our SDK here. The wrapper, the reason this is there is because the REST API for DocuSign expects certain entities for their endpoints, and we didn't want to, in the workflow, have to worry about knowing what that was and how we dealt with it. And so we created this wrapper to make it a little bit easier for developers to call into. So it deals with all the creation of envelopes and actually sending things. The way that it's happening is we've just got plain old Java objects that were created through using Jackson, and we can then take those objects, like an envelope or a recipient or the actual document, and we can represent those as JSON when we call into the DocuSign REST API. So you're probably asking, well, why did you do all of this? Why didn't you just use an SDK? Any company, any SaaS company that's got an API probably has a Java SDK. Why didn't you just use that? And they do. So DocuSign does have a Java SDK. The problem is that they have actually a connector for Alfresco, which is kind of cool, but it's only for 3.4 and doesn't work in 4, so we couldn't use that. But then they also have an SDK, so you can sort of roll your own thing. But we couldn't use that because they didn't have an SDK for the REST API. They have a SOAP API, and there was no way we were going to deal with that nonsense. So we decided, well, we wanted to use REST, and there's no SDK or no official SDK, so we'll build our own. At this point, that may exist. I don't know. I kind of did a little bit of research the other day to see if they've built this, and maybe they have. I couldn't really tell. I didn't spend a ton of time on it, but that's why we made the decision to kind of build our own. All right, now the proxy. So this thing that handles the request back, that callback from DocuSign. So it's responsible for sitting there listening and saying, hey, I've got a callback from DocuSign. It's just a PHP script that says, take this HTTP request and write it to disk. And so we write it to disk on this proxy server whenever a document's marked as signed. And then we take that content that's on disk. And the content that's on disk is the PDF. It's the actual, it's base64 encoded PDF that DocuSign sends to this script. And this thing is responsible for just dumping that onto disk. And then it curls. If you guys are familiar with curl, it just curls back into the repository through this web script. Okay, there's a million different ways we could have done that. That was the easiest way that we could think of in order to do this demo. And again, it's the reason we did it this way is to make sure that you guys could actually, or we could expose this without, use this over the internet without exposing our repository. Okay, all right. So how am I doing on time? It's almost 10 after. That's 30 minutes in. Is that right? Okay, good. Yeah, so I mentioned SSL. If you're using production DocuSign, you have to use SSL. There's no option. If you're using the developer version that we're using now, you can use either. You can use either one. And for simplicity's sake, we're using straight HTTP. All right, let's look at some code. None of that code is actual code that we're going to look at, by the way. That's all SQL code or something that I stole from the internet. Okay. So what's the right thing to talk about first? Let's talk a little bit about the wrapper that we've got. So we've got a few helper classes that sort of facilitate this whole process. We've got this giant class called DocuSign.java, and this is what's really responsible for sending out taking all the requests from the workflow and packaging that up and then sending that off to the REST API in DocuSign. We've got some entities that I mentioned. So we've got a recipient entity, a signable entity, a simple address label, and all of those are, again, they're just plain old Java objects. If I look at these guys, let me zoom in a little bit because you probably can't see that. They're just simple Java objects with setters and getters. And those were generated by Jackson, and that's what's used. So the workflow and the DocuSign SDK that we built uses those objects, or those classes, sorry, and then whenever we need to make a request to the DocuSign API, there's this DocuSign class that has a whole bunch of methods on it. And that's what, the interface into those methods is all through these entities. So it makes it really easy for the workflow to create what's necessary to send to DocuSign in an envelope, and then this deals with all the sort of gory details, okay? So what we do is we basically just say, let's make an envelope JSON. So we take the entities that are passed into the call, we convert those to JSON. We get, there's a REST API, REST endpoint for DocuSign called envelopes, and that's what we start just writing to, that REST API, or that endpoint. And so we send off the JSON, which describes the envelope, so it has information in there about who is this going to, who is it coming from, so all of those details, essentially the metadata about what's being sent to DocuSign. And then we also, through a multi-part form, we send in the actual content. If I look at my log file here that I've got, kind of getting geeky now, but if we look at the log file for this, bear with me because I have to dig through the log a little bit. So we basically dump this all to JSON, and that's what gets sent out to DocuSign. And for there it is. Okay. So can you guys see that highlighted line? Probably not. Let me zoom in just a little bit more. So that's the JSON object that gets sent out, and it's it has properties about that request, about that envelope. There's an email subject. That's what's going to get sent out to the user, the end user. There's a document name. There's and you can actually have an array of documents, so you can send multiple documents in one of these calls. There's a document name. There's an ID. There's a list of recipients, so you know who the signers are. And in this case, it was this bfgdemo.creative@gmail.com. And that's pretty much it. And then there's also the actual document itself, which I'm not showing here. There is also a little identifier here we're using the name as sort of the key, so that when the document comes back through that callback, the web script that we've got has to then say, okay, well, I've got a callback. What document was this that actually was used to initiate this request? And we're keying it off of name. We could probably do something better like the node ref or something like that, but right now it's the name. And embedded in that is the actual workflow ID. So we can go into, I'll actually show this. So we've got this completed script, completed class, completed envelope. And this is what's called through that web script. So we expose this as a web script. And what this is doing is it's actually saying, okay, you can imagine this is sitting there listening. It gets this request, this curl request from the PHP script. That's our proxy. And we just send in an XML file, basically, into this web script. And this web script parses that XML file and says, okay, I know there's content there. It's base64 encoded PDF. And there's actually metadata. And that metadata is what's sent by DocuSign. So DocuSign sends us this big XML file. It includes some metadata about what's being sent in and the content. And this web script is responsible for parsing that and figuring out, okay, what is this that's getting sent to me, and what do I need to do with it? So we go in and basically look at that name, because that name, the document name that's sent along in that XML file, is the key that we're using to sync back up with the workflow. And we query into I'm kind of flying through this, so I'm kind of running out of time, but we fly through the workflow. We go through the workflow service, and we say, hey, we know there's a document out there. Get me the node ref for this, and then find all the workflows associated with this node ref. And then we look at the workflow IDs and match that up to what's actually in the document name that's being sent in. So you can see here there's a call in to get workflows for content. We iterate through the instances and then find the right workflow instance and advance the next step in the workflow to close out that workflow. And the reason we're doing all of this is because you can imagine that this document, the original document, may have more workflows attached to it than just this particular workflow. Okay, so that's why we're doing all that work. Let me show you the workflow itself. So I can open up this guy up in the activity diagram editor. And you'll notice that most of it is service tasks that are backed by Java delegates. Gary's whole presentation was about that. So if I look at, I'm not in the activity view right now, but if I were in the activity view, I'd be able to see that these are mapping to Java delegates, which are mapping to the classes that I just showed you. Actually, I really didn't show you all of them. I showed you the DocuSign class, but we've also got these workflow classes that are these are the delegates. So if I look at init workflow, and there's an execute method in here, which is what's invoked through the workflow. This is where I'm setting properties on the DocuSign classes, those wrapper classes, and then calling into them when I want to kick off the workflow. So we've got a whole bunch of steps in that workflow. We init it, so we basically set some properties in there. We do something called check folders. So I didn't really show you this, but we need to know where that sort of waiting document is going to go in the repository while it's going through this process. So you sort of have to configure that up front to say, here's where these things need to go. I didn't show any of that, but that's what's done automatically when we kick off the workflow. And we expose this and share as a workflow that a user can invoke, and if a user invokes it, they have to provide some information up front. If they fail to provide the workflow, we've got to step in here to check that, or the folder, we've got to step in here to check that to make sure that they did it. If they didn't, then we kick back the workflow to them to make sure that they specify that. We prepare a package. This is really it's basically creating the envelope. I don't really know why we call it prepare package, but that's creating the envelope that DocuSign expects in order to make this call. And then we send it into DocuSign. So this delegate right here is really responsible for invoking. This is where all the good stuff happens. So we've got our DocuSign class that I showed you. This is sort of the main class for calling into our mini SDK. We pass in some basic information about DocuSign. So there's a URL, there's an API key, a developer key, there's a username and a password, which is kind of cool because you can actually, that signature request came from me, but you could imagine that you've got a large business where multiple people might be sending out these requests, and you don't necessarily want all of those requests coming from one particular person, like a generic username, a service account. So you can actually configure this such that you can have multiple users in DocuSign so that when Bob sends out a request, or Sally, it looks like it's actually coming from Sally from that company. It's a little bit more personal. So you can set these variables on the DocuSign class. We can then go out and actually, we have to ask DocuSign, hey, I want to log in, let me log in, and we've successfully logged in. Now I need to get an account to use to actually send this thing through. You can have multiple accounts on DocuSign. We just happen to be using the first one. And then we create the envelope and the information about where this is going. So we create this address label, and we take the BPM package, which contains the document that's going through the workflow. And then this is where we start to really make it all happen. So those are the highlights of what we've done. And we're about, 13 minutes. All right, so let me go back to the presentation real quick. And just kind of close this out. So hopefully we met the objective and covered all the goals for the presentation. But I wanted you folks to be able to get a basic understanding of what e-cigs are. So we kind of talked about that, showing how you can actually integrate with something like DocuSign through workflows. Touched on that. The REST API, even though we didn't have an SDK for it and we had to kind of build our own, it's really easy to use. It makes sense if you think about this as I'm sending a document to someone and I've got an envelope and I need to have an address label on it. If you use those concepts, then the REST API makes complete sense. They've done a really good job with that. And the documentation for the DocuSign REST API is fantastic. And again, this is all based on an activity workflow. So if you guys are using workflows in your business, then you're probably already familiar with activity, and it's pretty straightforward. The configuration for activity is a little bit of a mess. It's getting better. We saw a great presentation yesterday that's trying to make this whole process easier to get workflows up and running and forms for those workflows. But once you have it done, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's the majority of my presentation. So we've got a whole bunch of webinars and such on Bluefish's website. Those are also out on Alfresco's website. So if you're interested in DocuSign and you want to see the webinar we did a few months ago, great, it's out there. You can sign up for it. If you want to see more about Workdesk, you can do that. This presentation is available out on the Summit website as well as our website. And then we've got a YouTube channel where we provide a bunch of how-to videos and such that mainly targeted to developers. And feel free to contact us. So you can talk to me offline after the presentation, or feel free to email any of these addresses and we'll get back in touch with you. All right, so questions, open up.
Thank you. Thanks for the hangover kits, by the way.
No.
So the question is about whether the document's considered final necessarily when it goes to the DocuSign API, or is there a model where I could send a document, the user fills out X, Y, Z, and then signs it and sends it off? Is it a premise that the document's final by the time you send it as a package element?
Great question. API? So the question is whether or not a user can indicate that a document is final, or In our case, in this demo, no. They just mark a status and say, hey, this thing is ready to go. But there's no reason that we couldn't introduce a user task at the beginning of that workflow that says, hey, I want to start this thing through a workflow. I believe it to be final, but in order to really consider it final, I have to provide some metadata. So there could be a user task at the beginning of that workflow that basically routes back to the initiator, and they fill out whatever metadata is required in your particular case to mark that as final, and then submit it through the rest of the workflow that we just saw. Yep. Nope, it's completely possible to do that. And what's considered final is probably largely going to be up to what your business, what your legal team would consider final for review or for signatures. Any other questions? Okay. Wow, all right. Well, feel free to talk to me afterwards if you guys want, and you have a few minutes to go do what you need to do. Cool. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, forgot to talk about feedback forms. So there are forms on your chairs. Those are actually Bluefish forms. So we want to know how we did and how we can improve the next time we do this. So if you could, please just take a minute or two to just fill it out quickly, and then hand it to, or just leave it on your chair, and we'll pick them up when we're done. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.